Great. Thank you so much, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to spend a few moments. As Bill said, my name is Jeremy Pearl. I'm the Executive Vice President, CFO of the Jewish Community Foundation. I was once on your side of the table. Actually, it's not correct since these are circular tables now, but I graduated from USD Law more than a few years ago, back in the 90s, spent some time then with KPMG's high net worth consulting practice, where I was strongly voluntold to join an advisory committee at the Jewish Community Foundation, never expecting that to turn into my profession. It's been a wonderful journey, very privileged journey ever since, working with some truly incredible donors and professionals. So we are the Jewish Community Foundation. I'm proud to say we're the oldest community foundation, just by a whisker, over our good friends at the San Diego Foundation, established in 1967. We oversee around $700 million, around 850 donor families. So next slide, please. So this is our philosophy, not just a slogan up on the screen there. We do believe that every individual has the power to make a difference, and together that we can change the world. We want to support all donors wanting to improve our community. The same applies to our tremendous community of nonprofit organizations. We act not just as a grant maker, distributed about $1.8 billion over our lifetime, somewhere between 80 and 100 million a year, mostly to the San Diego community. But we also invest funds on behalf of over 80 nonprofits, as small as $10,000 up to tens of millions. We work with multi-generations to support their passions and help develop the next generation of philanthropists. And impact means a lot of things to us at the Jewish Community Foundation. We provided donors access to invest directly in affordable housing, economic development in San Diego via loan funds designed to return capital that can then be reinvested or granted again outright, recycled into the community. We've established an impact investment fund that is available to our donors and partner organizations. And we've established the Give For program, which uses a unique curated philanthropy model to make it easy for donors to make an impact on big challenges such as homelessness and climate change. And next slide, please. So really why we're here today, how we support professional advisors like you. We facilitated charitable contributions of interests in closely held enterprises, real estate partnerships, direct gifts of real estate, including commercial, single, and multifamily properties and land. And on the subject of today's panel, which I'm very much looking forward to, we're preparing an article summarizing our work in this area, specifically focusing on the critical importance of timing when planning a charitable contribution pre-transaction. I've personally been involved in an IRS examination focusing on this topic. It's certainly not something you forget when you're in the spotlight. And if you send me an email, we'll be happy to share that article with you in a couple of weeks when it's finalized. We do support highly tailored investment management strategies for our largest family funds by allowing our donors to recommend advisors of their choice. We support philanthropic legacy planning by working with advisors and clients to develop thoughtful plans by using a variety of tools, such as gift agreements and letters of intent. And last but not least, we're happy to run detailed crescendo illustrations for any of you. We can make available a simplified set of crescendo's tools right on our website. Next slide, please. Take just a moment to talk to you about our Trusted Charitable Advisor Program, which has been a wonderful opportunity for us at the Jewish Community Foundation to dive deeper into the process of charitable planning with a network of wonderful advisors. It's dedicated to building relationships, integrating charitable planning in order to achieve a client's overall goals. And we use a series of lunchtime workshops, generally lunchtime workshops, to meet and learn together with the goal of strengthening our client relationships. We certainly invite you to become a member of the 2023 cohort, which is enrolling right now. My colleague Charlene Wallach is listed there on the screen, and we do have a link on our website as well. Next slide, please. Actually, here's a sample of some of the amazing local and national firms that are part of our TCA network. We invite you to be on this list. After you graduate from the program, we do highlight your name and firm on our website, marketing material, other promotions throughout the year. And as I mentioned on our webpage, there is very prominently now, thank goodness, there is a professional advisors tab at the top of the website. And next slide, please. So thank you very much for this opportunity to highlight our work at Jewish Community Foundation. We're certainly very grateful to be part of North County Estate Planning Council. We've enjoyed getting to know many of you over the years. Please reach out to me or my colleagues, Ollie Ben and Charlene Wallach, anytime we can be of help. Thank you very much.
Jeremy, thanks so much. You and Charlene and Ollie have been such a great supporter of the council. Just to give you a story, when COVID was hitting in March of 2020, Charlene reached out to me, and knowing that we were going on hiatus, she invited us to piggyback off the JCF's Zoom webinar process and helped us put that together and really took care of all the details. I don't know anything about that, but that was her very proactive reach out to deal with going on hiatus and providing all our information on Zoom. I want to introduce Pete Tentler, who's our trifecta and master marketing fellow.
Thank you, Bill. You're too kind. Those that are new to the council, thank you and welcome. What we do, it's at the end of the meeting, I'm going to do my best to pair you up with two other people that'll complement your industry, and you get together for coffee or breakfast, maybe lunch or a hike or happy hour. But the idea here is to get to know each other more on a personal level and find out who you are and how you serve your clients and how you can hopefully collaborate. We call that the trifecta. And if I got a second, there's a gentleman that called me, where is he? Jason Rogers from San Diego Foundation. Can you stand up and just give us your feedback on your recent trifecta in a clear voice, or do you want to use the mic?
Yeah, sure. I just encourage you all to take part in this because we just got together last Friday for coffee and a great conversation. It's just a great way to get to know fellow colleagues and other professionals that work on about another. So it's great.
Who else? Who you were paired up with, Jason? Elizabeth Tress with estate planning and John Kramer. Yeah, good. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass the ball around one more time. Try to drop your card in there, and I'll pair you up hopefully later today.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Jason, so much. It is a great opportunity because we have such a short networking time here, but getting together really fosters the professional relationships amongst each of us. Without any really further ado, I'm going to introduce Cory Grant, who's our moderator and co-panelist with the folks here. He's going to introduce the panelists. But just one thing of note, we're resurrecting this series and really want to thank and honor really Bob Copeland, Shepard Mullin. He was really one of my guides as we built this series, and in the past it went for 3 years every 4 months or so, and helped design topics and speakers and panelists and what have you. And I've been wanting to get this resurrected, but Bob is sidelined with an illness. But when I made the April meeting known, Cory and Brett reached out and said, love to help put this on. So this is a result of they and Steve and Allan's great hard work in pulling this together. Cory.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. How about these red and black, little red and black theme, kind of, channeling the Aztecs? It's a great game last night. How many of you had Aztecs picked in your Final Four in your bracket? Okay. How many of you picked UConn to win? Ooh, okay. Well, that was great. All kidding aside, welcome today. And today we'll be going over business exit planning, the first of what we hope to be many. And today we'll focus on some of the issues that typical business owners address, hopefully before they get an offer. or before they're in a position where they're transitioning their business. So with me today, we've got Bill already introduced the team to some extent. We got Steve LaSala, runs the M&A department at Shepard Mullin. We've got Brett Pernicano at CI Dowling Yahnke, a partner who also focuses on pre-transition planning. And batting cleanup, we've got Allan Siposs, the president of ACG and partner at Keystone Capital. So we got the investment banker, the financial planner, then the M&A attorney, and then I'm just here to sort of move things along. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. One more, please. Planning early and often. That's really the key. Business succession starts when the first day you open your business. Never get into something without figuring out how you're going to get out, whether you're mountain climbing or starting a business. You always want to know where your exit strategy is. So we're going to focus on that teamwork. And if we can move to the next slide, please. These are kind of the issues that we're going to focus on in detail. And I won't read the slides, but there are different nuances. If you sell to an ESOP, you take private equity, you sell to a strategic buyer, but we're going to try to really break down the process that the business owner should go through, regardless of what that buyer entity happens to be. And then really what we're going to focus on is that last point. What can be done in advance to add that additional value? Next slide, please. So these are kind of another the issues that we're going to cover today. Retirement planning. Can you sell your business and live off the proceeds? And that means, that's a lot of times it's a deep dive. You got to take all those personal expenses out of your company before you sell it. What is real EBITDA? And then estate tax considerations, corporate cleanup, and then we've got a key employee in this fact pattern. So we'll talk about deferred compensation and transition bonuses. So we figured the best way to explain something like this and go through the issues was to come up with a fact pattern based on a family that's fairly common. We'll meet the Hynet family and their Corona logistics. Next slide, please. We've got a senior generation, Owen and Gladys, 65 and 60. Kids are out of the house. Couple grandkids are around. We got one son in the business, a daughter who's married to, let's say, someone who isn't a favorite of the family. And then you've got a non-involved son. So a lot of issues. The business is very strong. As you can imagine, the last couple of years with COVID and so forth, logistics has taken off. It's a significant value. And there's also real estate associated with the land. So, Owen has got unsolicited offers over the years, but has never taken them up. But this time, his wife says, "Hey, let's travel more." You ever hear that? Is that a common fact pattern? I don't know, kids are out of the house. Wife says, "Hey, let's travel more." Pretty soon there's a tug of war between the business owner and lifestyle. So, next slide, please. We're going to focus on that. What happens when you get an offer? That's going to be one of the first things that we do. And we'll walk you through that today with everybody's help. So with that, next slide, please. Let's talk about pre-transition planning. They receive an unsolicited offer. So the first thing, is the advisory team assembled? Well, we've got our investment banker, M&A attorney, tax advisor. We have CPA, financial advisor. So the question is the offer as good as it gets, and what can be done to enhance value? So with that, next slide, please. We'll talk about the truth about preemptive offers. And I said he was batting cleanup, but I'm going to toss this one right to Allan to lead off. The truth about one buyer is no buyer. So Allan, maybe give us a little rundown on that.
Thank you very much and welcome, or thank you for welcoming me today. I really appreciate the opportunity. Let me start by saying that I've been doing M&A since I had a full head of hair. So it's been quite some time. And in all my years of doing M&A, every single time, without one exception, where there's a preemptive offer and an investment banker gets involved, there's an improvement in that offer. And that either comes from that party that makes the preemptive offer improving this offer on their own, or it comes from running a process where there's competition at the table. And without that competition, that preemptive offer has very little motivation to increase. So I would say one buyer is no buyer, and a preemptive offer on its own is very dangerous. The things that we look at when preemptive offers come in are, what's the form of the transaction? Is it a stock or an asset purchase? Is there any, let's call it contingent consideration, non-cash consideration? Is the total value attractive, but it's structured in such a way that there's a low probability that it'll actually happen because the hurdles that are necessary to hit the earn-out are very high. So one buyer, no buyer. If you have clients that have preemptive offers, please encourage them to run some type of a process where you bring other parties to the table and increase the competition so that that offer can improve.
Thanks, Alan. Steve, what do you have to, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, everybody. What I'll say, I know there's a lot of advisors in the room who are working with companies on an everyday basis, and the offer that we're talking about could be coming in today. They come in all the time, and a lot of times they're a surprise. Businesses haven't been running that long. I didn't think I was on some private equity group's radar, but these groups are out there looking all the time, sniffing around for these opportunities. It's their world it's very competitive to find these deals. And so more often than not, I get a call that says, I just wasn't expecting this. And I'm not really ready to have this conversation, but holy cow, this is way more money than I would have expected to be offered at this point. And so it's, for the folks in this room, it's about being ready. And because you don't want to be caught flat-footed on a lot of different things. Who owns the business right now? Do you have a good buy-sell agreement? Do you have are all shareholders on the same page in terms of getting a deal done? Is the business owned by individuals? Is it owned by trusts? Has there been given good thought into that? Future charitable planning, all these things you want to plan in advance, because those offers, they come in, and when they do come in, they don't last. It's not like you go, oh, give me 4 or 5 months to get my act together and then we'll talk. It's not the way it works. So for everybody in this room, it's kind of on you to talk to your clients about making sure that they're ready. And having these, we talk about getting a team involved. M&A attorneys, bankers, wealth managers, trust attorneys, CPAs. There's nothing wrong with getting folks lined up in advance. Like for folks like me, for M&A, I don't want to spend all that money. There's nothing to spend at this point. It's just about getting your team organized so that you're ready when these things come in. And if a lot of times there's things we can do in advance, and we can talk to you about whether it makes sense to do those things, like I think about a buy-sell agreement, or are your corporate documents in order? Those can be done in advance, and that's up to you whether you want to do them or not. But there's nothing scary about kind of getting those conversations going so you're ready, and you don't want to miss out on those opportunities when they do come in.
Thanks, Steve.
Hey, Cory, can I do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think, the investment bankers, the M&A attorneys, they're coming in almost kind of reactively to what's going on. And I think there's a lot of advisors in the room that maybe have worked with clients for a decade or two prior to a transaction happening. And I think one of the themes that I'm going to focus on today is the psychology around the transaction. I think, there's a lot of really brilliant minds in this room that can get through the technical side, but how do we set the stage and set the right expectations for the client to go through the transaction and ultimately see it as a successful exit? And I think when that offer comes in, it kind of changes the game. If we're advising a client 5 to 10 years prior, and maybe they start out as a client that just started a company 10 years ago and didn't know if it'd work or not. And we've worked with them for a decade, and through that time, the business has become more and more successful. And then, one of their clients, or one of their folks in their industry wants to come acquire them. They get this offer, and the psychology changes. And I think that's the hard part. That's the part that we have to overcome, is now the expectation is set, and it may or may not be right. And then we now have to battle some of that with our clients getting through this exit. And so I think it's really important that, if we can have this dialogue beforehand, what does an exit mean to you? When do you want to exit? I work with clients that are in their 20s, and I work with clients that are in their 60s. There's a generational gap there. as to how we look at businesses that are being formed today. I can tell you some of the millennials I speak with, they already have an exit in mind before they've even started their company. And I think some of you are shaking your heads because you know that. And there are folks in this room that have been grinding it out for 40 years that have a business that they didn't think it was even worth this. And they get this offer and now all of a sudden the world changes to them. And so I think it's really important to analyze the psychology around who it is you're speaking to and what their expectations are, either when they set up this business and form it, or when they've been doing this for 2 or 3 generations.
That's a great point, Brett. And, we'll focus on both the economics and the psychological issues that people are dealing with. And it's a great point to bring up the multi-generational or, know your audience kind of issues. Just a little anecdote. I'm dealing with a client who I've worked with for probably 6 years in Florida and the Tampa Bay area, and he's a real estate owner. And well, guess what? Developments come his way. And so he was holding raw land. A couple of years ago, we set it up in a family LLC, made some gifts. When the value was very favorable, made some more gifts, did a installment sale transaction, a couple other things. And now they're getting bids from home builders to build homes. And the fact that we had that estate planning structure set up was really critical. And in fact, once the first sale comes in of the land, that will pay off the premium finance note on the life insurance that's owned by that family as part of their estate liquidity program. So, planning early, planning often is really, really important. Before we leave this slide, I want to throw it back to the panel. That final point, a disciplined, competitive process puts negotiating leverage on the seller side. Allan, why don't you jump in with your thoughts there?
So
How did we get that?
let me say there are firms that are investment bankers that focus on the sell side, representing owners of companies that want to sell their companies. And there are firms that specialize on the buy side. And it's very common for private equity groups to literally have call centers that they employ to reach out to business owners to say, hi, it's Allan from ABC. We'd like to talk to you about buying your company. And the reason is the preemptive offer, the unshopped offer, is the holy grail for private equity groups and strategic investors, because you're taking some of the competitive leverage off the table for the seller. If I talk to you one-on-one and you don't have anyone else at the table competing with me, I'm going to get a better deal. And that's why they're so aggressively reaching out to all of your clients, because they want that preemptive opportunity. So lack of competition, lack of urgency, you no longer control the timing if you have a preemptive offer. If you're running a process, you've got multiple people at the table, you set your time frame, you set when offers have to come in, and if they don't play to your time frame, you move on. So they'll play to your time frame. So that time element and urgency is extremely important. And then scarcity. Every investor has 3 alternatives, in my opinion. They can buy your client's business, number 1. Number 2, they can buy a similar business, a competitor, if you will. And number 3, they can try and create it from the ground up. And the more you make option 2 and option 3 unattractive because of how unique your client's business is through all the preparation work we're talking about here this morning, the more valuable that company is going to be. And you get that opportunity for leveraging that positioning when you have multiple buyers at the table. So it's extremely important. Back to the key message here, one buyer really is no buyer. You have to have multiple parties to optimize the outcome.
Thank you, Allan. Steve, Brett, anything to add to that?
I'll just, I talk to a lot of clients that ask me, should I bring in an investment banker? Do I need one here? I got this unsolicited bid and it came from a competitor that I know, or it came from my supplier, and somebody I've been working with for many years. And so I don't really think, I think this is the best I'm going to do. And the answer is you should hire an investment banker about 99% of the time. They can add a lot of value to your process, even if there's no kind of, the process can be run a lot of different ways. You don't have to put it out to, 500 private equity groups. It could be just, well, let's talk to this one and then kind of think about a few others that might be in the space that might be interesting, or maybe financial buyers may or may not make sense. So the process can be run a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be this big, scary, put out a big book. And frankly, even if you're only decide at the end of the day, you're only going to talk to that one that just came in, investment bankers still at a tremendous amount of value. You still have to negotiate. The negotiation around price is a lot of art and a lot of science to that. How does EBITDA determined? What are the add backs to EBITDA in terms of how do I get to, what's the right multiples in this industry? How do I negotiate around working capital and the various adjustments to the purchase price? That's something, M&A attorneys can sort of fake it, but you really want somebody who does that for a living because that's real dollars.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the other thing too is I've had two people get approached because they're buddies. They work together. They're a client of a bigger institution. And, obviously I understand the personal relationship, but at some point you need to make sure that you're doing your due diligence as a seller. And put that aside. And he just said, I understand, as a buddy I've worked with for 30 years, it's a construction business. We've had handshake deals for 3 decades. But I said, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you're exhausting all options. And while they're a great buyer, you don't know what could go awry in the process, and to have other options available is critically important.
Thanks, guys. That was a lot of good information. If we can move on to the next slide, please. We talk a lot about valuation, and that's sort of where this discussion was leading is what is the value where, and then the logical question is, well, what can be done to enhance valuation? Again, just to be redundant, time is your friend. You start early, start often. And then, I'm going to just turn this straight over to the panel to say, what do you see as most common best practices to enhance valuation, and what can the estate planning team do to when their client is in a situation where they may be receiving these offers, and what do you recommend that they consider to enhance the valuation of their company?
So I'll start off. I know there are a few valuation professionals in the room, so bear with me as I bring this down to a very basic level. But for an investor, it really comes down to level and certainty of future cash flows. The greater the projected level of cash flows, and the more certain you're going to hit those cash flows, all else being equal, the more an investor will pay for that opportunity. So how do you get to level and certainty? A lot of it goes into, is there dependence on the owner in the business? Is there concentration of buyers or customers for the business, or vendors to the business? Are there skeletons in the closet? Is there an EPA issue, a real estate issue, a pending lawsuit that may create a problem, a claim on IP that might create a problem? Clean all that up. Make sure corporate documents are in order. Make sure your systems can withstand the scrutiny of due diligence. For those of you in the room who have not had clients go through due diligence, I will tell you it is not a fun process. It's very distracting, and you want to do it once and you want to get to a close. One of the worst outcomes is a due diligence process that doesn't result in a closed deal, because now you got to go back and start over again. It can take 2 to maybe even 3 months of deep digging into every question you can imagine about the business and more. So the better your accounting systems are, your ERP system, all your other reporting systems, the more readily available and dissectable data is, the better you'll survive that. So those are just a few things that we see in terms of increasing the level and certainty perception that a buyer has on a business.
Yeah, and I think, one of the other things too is just contracts, length of time, consistent revenue. Obviously there are businesses that have short-term and long-term contracts. So looking at the structure of them, concentration of clients. I've had a couple of clients that have, 40 or 50% of their revenue is coming from 1 to 2 clients. While it's attractive, it's not as attractive to a buyer. And so looking at that, and then also looking at industry specifics. I think, we all believe our businesses are as successful as they can be. But if you can work with the M&A attorney or the investment banker and get data on industry specifics in regards to profit margins, how do we compare across that industry? There could be some substantial value changes, right? You may have, a company, pushing out, call it 35, 40% margins when the industry is maybe 42 or 43%. That puts them on the lower end of the spectrum. And then you compound that with maybe a lower multiple, and now the valuation substantially changes. And so really getting some good data points, I think typically from more of the, investment bankers, as to where do we fall? Where if we were to compare against other transactions and those type of values, how much are we leaving on the table in our current environment we're in?
I think getting back to kind of bring in a team, I think a team can help, particularly your investment banker, in figuring out, just kind of looking at your business from the outside and saying, how is a buyer going to view your business? What are the risk considerations? Is there significant customer concentration? That's not necessarily a deal killer for anybody. I mean, I sold a business last year that had like 80% with one particular customer, and they couldn't get away from that because that one customer kept sending them more and more business. Customer was Tesla, and Tesla was growing like crazy and just sending more and more business. But we got past that issue. They had very deep ties to folks at the customer, and that was kind of worked out in diligence. But we went in kind of knowing this was going to be a big issue and a big concern for folks. And so, how do we address this? How do we get everybody comfortable? How do we get the right people at Tesla talking to the buyer so they understand, that this is a relationship that's critical on both sides, and it's not just, they're not going to go away and lose that customer. But these are the kind of things that outside advisors are going to be able to issue spot for your business when you're thinking about a sale. The other thing on kind of on the legal side of things, and how many people in this room work with S corps? I'm guessing a lot, right? Probably everybody. S corps present their own unique challenges in getting sold, particularly in kind of in a rollover equity situation where the owners are going to keep equity in the business going forward. We want to make sure we can do these things tax efficiently. But one of the things we run into all the time, and I've sold S corps, is the S doesn't stand for small. I mean, some of these are huge businesses where there's a lot of pitfalls with them. And so these are issues you can get in front of in advance. We do what's called an S corp audit, where we look at, do you have a valid S corp? Did you make a transfer to a trust that you shouldn't have? Did you bring in a foreign shareholder? What have you done that potentially could have blown your S corp? These are actually fixable problems. They just require time. And the buyers are very concerned about these issues. I mean, I've seen situations where a buyer will say, we're not comfortable you're a valid S corp, and you may be a C corp, in which case you should have been paying C corp taxes, in which case we need a big escrow until we can get comfortable that this is not going to be an issue. And that's real value and a real concern, and it may cause a buyer to just walk. And those are issues that we can get in front of in advance if we have a chance to do that.
Yeah, Allan, please.
I just wanted to add one other thought, which is the bane of every investment banker is the unrealistic value expectation. And that often comes from what I'll call country club chatter or yacht club chatter, where two business owners talk, one just sold their company and gosh, I just sold it for 28 times EBITDA. Well, guess what just gets tattooed on the other person's mind? My company's got to be worth at least 28 times EBITDA because it's better than his. And what the person doesn't tell you is, yeah, it was 3 times EBITDA cash at close and 25 in some wallpaper stock that's worthless or an earnout that they're never going to hit. Or EBITDA was adjusted to such an extent that they're using the book EBITDA, not truly recast EBITDA. So there are lots of manipulations that get told between these war stories that set unrealistic expectations. So very important that your clients have a sense for where value is and they're comfortable with that. And then I just wanted to loop back to one key point, which is the quality of earnings. It's very important if your clients are going to be going through a process that they have rock solid financial statements. And one way to ensure that financials will withstand the scrutiny of due diligence is to get what's called a quality of earnings review. And that's where an outside CPA firm will come in and look at the books from a buyer's perspective, make sure that all of the accruals are done per GAAP, all of the revenue has been booked properly, et cetera, so that when you go through your due diligence process, the old trick of we, the buyer, looked at the books and that EBITDA number is not what you told us it was. It's a little bit lower. So that means value is going to go down. You pull the rug out from that argument because you know that your number is airtight. So quality of earnings, very, very important. Country club chatter, put it aside, look at real valuation.
I'm curious, this question for Allan, how often are you recommending a sell side quality of earnings, and how often are people actually doing them? Because I agree, and I'm seeing this more and more. It was not something that I would have seen a lot 5 years ago, but it's an expense up front, and the buyer is going to do their own homework. So just curious.
I agree with you. In the last 5 years, the prevalence of quality of earnings has gone way up. And I think that's largely because of the games the buyers have been playing with accounting when they get into due diligence. So as sellers become more savvy, as their advisors become more aware, I think they're advising them to do that. And so we're seeing a much higher percentage. So I would say right now of our clients, 70% are probably getting sell-side quality of earnings. The ones that aren't have audited statements already, so they feel like they're fairly good shape. But those that have a compilation or a review or a internal statements, almost always will do a Q of E. Very important.
So, but when the buyers do their quality of earnings, they will bring in a firm whose real sole job is to beat up EBITDA and say, well, no, that's not EBITDA. This is EBITDA, and lower it. And remember, it's EBITDA times multiple is often purchase price. And so that whatever the multiple is, that's how much that's going to cost. And so this is something that is, in my view, worth every penny, and something you want to do because you want to be prepared for those arguments. Again, big dollars at stake.
And I have two scenarios. One, last year, actually, client has a pretty large dental practice, and he went through that process, didn't do quality of earnings before, and actually walked away from the deal in that process. After they beat up the EBITDA enough, he said, I'm done, and left. And coincidentally, 6 months later, about 2 months ago, same buyer came back. He had done a little bit more work with his earnings, and the deal closed within 6 weeks. So it's super important. I have one client right now that's actually just did the quality of earnings. It was the first time I had a CPA say, why are they doing this on the sell side? And I said, it's the new thing, I guess. And so it's actually making the process a little bit easier. But coincidentally, this same issue on multiples and valuation came up because, 4 months ago, he got that offer and his mindset was, it's 8 to 9 times earnings. Well, they went through a competitive bid. They got 4 right now they're working through. And the highest is 5 to 6 times earnings. And he's actually got it. He said it to me on the phone yesterday. He said, it's actually my ego I'm working with through right now. It's, how do I, in my mind, reconcile the fact that, they came to me with some unsolicited offer at 6 to 7 or 8 to 9. I have good quality of earnings. And now they're coming back at, 5 to 6. And it's a difference of $4 or $5 million net after tax. And I kind of talked to him and I said, is it worth it for you? You're 75. You have 3 amazing kids and a bunch of grandkids, and you've been doing this for 18 years. I said, is that $4 million going to change your life? And he said, honestly, no, he's got plenty of assets. And so we got to the psychology of it, even though his ego was really frustrated about that valuation. And ultimately, I think the quality of earnings is going to get him through it and make it seamless. But yeah, trying to get them away from that peg numbers is a very challenging thing.
Well, the interesting thing, we've talked a lot about numbers, talked a lot about processes, taxes, entities. One thing we haven't talked about is the value, well, probably your most valuable asset if you have a business, and that's the people. So I'm going to focus a little bit upon, you remember in our fact pattern, there's a key employee who just didn't happen to have the right last name. So what we see as a best practice to enhance valuation is golden handcuffs. And 70% of Fortune 500 companies use life insurance-based structures for their tax advantages to fund deferred compensation, golden handcuff type structures. So simple question, if you have a key employee that's going to stick around after the sale, if I say to you as a buyer, hey, yeah, she's going to stay, it's no big deal, guarantee, yeah, she's going to hang around. You say, yeah, right, checks in the mail. But if I say, oh, here's her deferred compensation agreement, here's the funding structure, and here's what she gets if she stays, which do you think is going to result in a higher purchase price? This is a trick question here. Okay, so again, we heard a lot about the numbers side of what you need to do to get your company in a good place, but don't forget about the people. I'll just share another story. Family I've been working with for a long time here in town. If you have termites, that you've probably seen them at your house once or twice over the years. Family-owned business, 3rd, 4th generation, and he actually, the owner, put in his clause, his brother's a successor trustee, and his brother has the ability in negotiating an offer with a potential buyer, if he decides that's what he goes after the principal passes, to not take the highest monetary offer if there's a better offer that's better for the employees as a group. So, that's just kind of an interesting fact pattern that sometimes there's more value in a business than just purely the numbers. Sometimes, you want it, your clients, one of those people that, hey, they want to take care of their people. And a lot of times you can speak to that as advisors on the front end. Absolutely.
Sorry, one other comment that is just very important. To the extent that your client companies are thinking about giving key employees equity, please, please, please tell them not to do that.
Exactly.
Please. There are so many, as you know, as attorneys and other advisors, there's so many rights that a minority owner has in California that can screw up a good deal. There are many other mechanisms, including what Cory talked about, to incent key employees, but please don't give them equity.
That's an absolute key point. Is if there are a number of ways to help without giving up equity, because all it does is cause problems. Yep.
And to that point, back in 21, we had a client that was going through a transaction. They had two final bidders, and one they ended up going with, and I'm saying like the 11th hour, like 2 days before close, the client pulled the plug, and it was because of employees. It was because of the way that they were treating the transaction at the end and trying to just put employee agreements in place. And there was an issue with that, and the buyers they were finicky on certain things. And it's not something you go through in the due diligence phase when you're going through data. You don't really kind of look at the numbers and say, okay, that looks fine. But then what about these employees? These are folks that have been with us for 24, 25 years. And the owner absolutely pulled the plug. Smart move. She ended up selling for $24 million more to the second buyer 5 months later after the LOI expired. But, don't downplay the fact that, to your point, human capital is what keeps these businesses going, and a buyer can absolutely shake that culture up and not make it great experience for those that are going to stay around.
Thanks, Brad. And that's actually a good segue into our next slide. Issues to consider we've talked about enhancing the valuation and so forth. And Brett, I'm going to toss this right to you. The issues to consider, can you live off what you're getting? What kind of process do you go through with your clients pre-sale to determine whether an offer is like a good one for them or not?
Thanks, Cory. It's funny, there's a lot of very smart people in this room, and I think the concept of a budget seems pretty basic, and I can't tell you how complex it gets for somebody that's retiring. Let alone selling a business. And so I just say that because you'd think it's a simple process. It gets a lot more complicated when a business owner runs half or 2/3 of their expenses through the company, and they don't even know what they're spending until you actually have to pin them to it. I have clients that take weeks to build these things out. And for better or for worse, it's the number one component of success in retirement. You can sell a company for 80, 90 million bucks, but if you spend 10 million a year, you got yourself a problem. And that does happen. And you laugh, but I've seen it before. And unfortunately, it's the financial advisor that has to sit down and have the really hard conversations saying, hey, you're going to spend too much and run out of money. It's not the M&A attorney. It's not the investment banker. We're the ones that are the legacy advisor in this process, and the estate attorney. But we're the ones that have to deal with the aftermath a decade later if they spend too much. And so getting down to the basics on a budget and actually holding them to that is important, and building it out based on 3 kind of categories. I'd say you have your needs, your wants, and your aspirations. Your needs are your basic core needs. Your wants are maybe I want to do this, or I'd like to buy that. And aspirations are you want to buy a plane, fine. Do you have enough money to do that? And I do work with the investment banker on building this out to say, give me a hypothetical run of 5 or 6 valuations. And how does that accomplish their needs based on a stress tested scenario? But the budget seems so basic, and I'll tell you, it is a lot more challenging than you would think. And so getting through that's important. And then evaluating liquidity constraints. Clients come out of a deal and they have 40 million liquid. What do they do with it? Do they want to buy something? Do they want to buy a second or third home that doesn't generate income? That becomes an issue. You're sucking up a lot of cash pretty quickly for something you've worked hard to build, but now you're burning through cash pretty quickly. So really kind of going through that needs and wants is important. And then building a holistic balance sheet. I think a lot of clients look at their net worth and it's like, oh, I have a business and I have maybe $5 or $8 million liquid or not liquid or in real estate. That balance sheet shifts. It's in a totally different animal post a transaction. And so evaluating the components of it and where you can pull assets from and where you can't are very important. Do they have outside rentals? And so we want to definitely look at the entire net worth and figure out what needs to be done. Income sources I mentioned, and then payout structure and cash flow timing. A lot of people have earnouts. I don't know what the percentage is exactly. Maybe Allan, you can tell me about on how many people actually hit them. But building that into your model is pretty important. The success of that could be critical to somebody actually having money through retirement or not. I've had people that have pushed the envelope and said, well, give me a 90% probability on an earnout to hit. How many people in this room think that's the truth? It's really probably closer to 40 or 50% if I were to guess. And that may be $3 or $4 or $5 million that they need in 6 or 7 years or 3 years to get them through retirement. So when we build this out, if we build out the basic budget, then we need to look at all the scenario testing. And we just literally closed a deal 2 weeks ago. And I think the investment banker and I spent probably 40 or 50 hours on 10 or 12 different models for this client, because there were a lot of working capital adjustments that were being made at the 11th hour. And the client just needed peace of mind. And so we literally stress tested it 3 or 4 times just to make sure that he was going to be okay. It was critical. The investment banker at the end of the deal said, this wouldn't have happened without you actually having your modeling, because I can model all kinds of different cash flow assumptions. I can model net after taxes based on certain assumptions. And that's what the client needs, peace of mind. Everybody says, what's your number? It's kind of I laugh at the question because I'm like, nobody really knows until you actually do the data and do the actual research and analysis. And so probably way longer than I need to speak, but
No, that's good. In fact, those models are in the appendix. They don't make good slides, and we didn't want to get too granular, but I think in the appendix, those models are laid out. So anybody who wants to see them firsthand, and obviously you can talk to Brett for more details. Allan?
I wanted to add a couple of thoughts, but I wanted to start with a question for Brett. And that is, from my perspective, from a valuation point of view, it's unlikely that a business owner who is selling a company is going to get the same annual cash flow as they do from the business. Though often business owners expect that that's the case. So they'll say, I've got whatever, $1 million a year I'm pulling out of this business. I want to sell it and have at least $1 million a year. And I'm sure we could spend an hour talking about the financial theory of why that doesn't make sense, because there's a difference in the level of value and risk associated with a diversified, well-managed portfolio versus a concentrated risk in a privately held company. They're very different risk profiles, thus the return will be different. But that's a key element that a lot of business owners fight with. This is what my cash flow has been. I want to maintain that. Wanted to talk about earnout structures as well, because it's a good question, and it largely depends on how they're negotiated. The higher on the P&L you can place an earnout. So earnouts tied to revenue, royalties, et cetera, high probability of getting those hit. Earnouts tied to EBITDA, low probability of getting hit. I had a client years ago, we sold their business and we had the earnout tied to revenue. And she literally sent me a bouquet of roses every year. She got her earnout payment because the buyer wanted to do it tied to EBITDA, and we negotiated like heck to get it to the revenue level. And as you might expect, post-transaction earnings went down. So they wouldn't have hit it if it was tied to EBITDA, but they did hit it because it was tied to revenue. So it's a mixed bag in terms of what percentage do get hit. It's an area that's fraught with peril. I'm sure Steve has lots of stories about earnouts and how they go bad. Earnouts and rep and warranties are probably the two big areas where you have most post-transaction litigation. Tread carefully, but if it's structured well, high enough on the P&L, I think you've got a much better chance of getting hit.
The other thing too, it's very popular. I think the last 4 transactions between 16 and 28% was rollover equity. And obviously the PE firms that are buying these shops are telling them all kinds of glory stories about, oh, we're going to make this thing 5X in 4 years. And I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, obviously the markets will tell. And I think them banking on that is a big concern. I've had 3 clients that said, this is what's going to happen. This is going to come. I'm like, all right, well, let me put a 15% probability that you get half that and stress test it. And part of that is just to, again, make sure you know what the worst case scenario is. Because if you bank on it doesn't happen, then you have a really hard conversation in 3 or 4 years with that client to say, hey, sorry, it didn't work out. And now we need to cut your $1 million a year spending down to $400K. And that's not a great conversation to have. The other thing too is understanding how the balance sheet changes when there is rollover equity. And so building out a portfolio that complements it. It's one thing to say, oh, I got all this liquidity, and then I'm going to all of a sudden start buying a bunch of alternative investments or adding more. And I'm like, you've still got a lot of your balance sheet tied up in a privately held business that you have very little control over now. And so understanding how to barbell that risk and build it out and make the client comfortable with that risk level is important. And lastly, when you do the modeling, if you do it right, you can give the investment banker a really good spectrum of sale prices. I can tell you if the client says, I need this much money and these are the assets and I can model it out, I can say, great, here's the spectrum of transaction values on a net level. You need to sell at a minimum of 18.5 million, but you could go anything above that. And then the investment banker knows how they can do the actual negotiations. And that's really important. I think that's incredibly valuable for both the investment banker and ultimately the client.
I agree completely with what Allan was saying about when it comes to earnouts, revenue based, it's way better than EBITDA based, but they're also more rare. Buyers are mostly focused on profit, and that's where you see these earnouts. The other thing is we're seeing way more of this sort of things we're talking about, earnouts in this market, earnouts and seller notes, and back-ended consideration, rollover equity. It's just that's the risk tolerance of buyers in this market has changed dramatically over the last 12 months. We're seeing auctions, fewer bidders are coming in, fewer bidders are coming to the table. First of all, bids are coming in lower because debt's way more expensive. And then when they are coming with a bid, it's often with these kind of less tolerance for risk. So we're seeing more of these. It's just that's the world we're living in right now. And so for folks like Brett, and the challenge is, all right, we're gonna model all this out, but we can't count on this stuff that's future based. You don't control your company after you sell it. I don't care what the buyer tells you. If they've got a majority of the equity, they're in control, and they can do a lot to improve or destroy the business after closing. And so I've had situations where I'll always tell clients, earnouts are great when they're gravy, but when they're critical part of the deal, and I wouldn't do the deal without the earnout, and I can't live the way I want to live unless I hit this earnout, that's not a great situation to be in, because sometimes even the revenue-based earnouts, they get missed, and there's a lot of blame. But if there's one area of M&A that's fraught with litigation, it's over this earnout, because I was promised certain things and they didn't deliver. I was promised resources. I was promised my team was going to be able to stick around, and they fired everybody. So risky with these sort of deferred parts of the deal consideration.
Great point Steve makes about the shift in the marketplace and the buyer tolerance for risk. It's absolutely changed, and that's led to more non-cash consideration. I wanted to tag back to something Brett said about rollover equity. Would it be okay if we take a quick segue and explain what that is and how the mechanics work?
Yeah, we got.
So if I'm a private equity group and I'm buying Brett's company, and he's been the guy in that company for the last 10 years, and I don't know that space, I'm just an investor, I'm going to want Brett to have equity in that company going forward. So I might come in and say, hey, Brett, I want to buy your company, but I want you to own 20% going forward so that you've got some skin in the game, and you're going to run the business for a period of time. Brett says, okay, I'm getting 80% off the table, 20% in equity. Maybe I can live with that. Where it gets interesting, though, is Brett, in rolling over equity, gets the same benefit of leverage that the buyer gets coming into the deal. So let me give you an example. Let's assume that Brett's company is generating $2 million of EBITDA a year. No question, it's $2 million. And the deal multiple is 5. This just makes the math easier for me. So let's say it's a $10 million deal. The buyer is going to go out and borrow 3 turns of equity, or $6 million. And they're going to bring in from their fund $4 million of equity. So borrowed 6, bringing in 4, total of $10 million enterprise value. Brett may think, okay, I'm going to roll over 20%. That means I got to write a check or leave $2 million on the table. It's a $10 million deal. But the equity is calculated, or his rollover piece of the equity is calculated based on that equity check, that $4 million piece, not the $10 million piece. Everyone with me? So 20% of $4 million is $800,000, not $2 million. 4 million in equity, 6 million in debt, 10 million total transaction value. So he gets the same upside potential as the buyer does, the same benefit of bringing in debt, same risk of bringing in debt, just to be clear, but the same potential benefit of bringing in debt. And what I would say is, I absolutely agree, rollover equity should be sort of the gravy, or that's nice to have, but I don't need to have. One of the things that you need to look at is the track record of the fund that you're working with. And private equity, as I'm sure you all know, has had phenomenal success in some areas and phenomenal non-success in other areas. And who you hitch your wagon with, or your client hitches their wagon with, is extremely important in figuring out how likely that equity is going to be worth more than the day of close.
And maybe you can touch on this, is just the structure of what that private equity firm is doing. Is this a platform business they're buying? Are they bolting it on to an already built structure? That would obviously be something to evaluate. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that right now, since it's changing.
So there are two types of investments that private equity groups typically make. There's the platform transaction, where the business is the first acquisition in a given area. Let's say you're a furniture manufacturing company, and this is a table and manufacturing business, and you're going to buy it. It's the first acquisition in that space. Then the second type of acquisition that a PE firm will make is a tuck-in or an add-on, where they already have the table manufacturing company and they go out and buy a lectern manufacturing business, and it's tucked into the existing operation. Where the platform company transaction is happening, it's much more likely they're going to want rolled over equity, because it's the first investment in the space. They don't know the industry. Where they already own the table manufacturer and they're buying your lectern manufacturing business, they might say, don't need you so much. We sort of understand the space. We're more comfortable with you rolling over less, or maybe not even at all, if they have a strong management team in place. So that's shifting a little bit. Buyers, as private equity groups, again, back to Steve's comment about propensity for risk, love to see rollover equity, because they want the buyer, or pardon me, the seller, to share in the risk. So they want to see them saying, yeah, I believe in the future potential of the business. I'm going to ride alongside you. It's also harder to get debt because it's more expensive. So any contribution that a seller can make to the equity to getting the deal done helps in the overall packaging.
So the question you might ask is, how does that affect the what estate planning issues are there around that when you have rollover equity? Okay, so if I may, I'll kind of sort of turn this, if you will, to the estate planning side, which is probably a little more interesting to everybody in this room than some of the stuff we've been talking about so far. But this is this next slide, please. This really gets into a lot of the pre-planning and the pre-planning that you all are going to get involved in. So I assume, who should I put on the spot? Maybe I'll put, maybe I'll put John Kramer. John. So if you have a family that's selling a business and they're going to take a rollover equity, what kind of estate planning would you recommend before they do that to maybe lessen the blow or help the family, you know, with decreased valuations, things like that? What would you do?
We utilize insurance oftentimes that provide either short or long term liquidity. Maybe until they have that liquidity that they can use term, if they have a need for long term liquidity that they can use stable calls.
Right. So estate planning considerations, again, this is one of the things you want to do up front. I can't tell you how many times I run into situations where, you know, I'll get a call from from Steve or from someone say, hey, my client got an offer and now they're asking for estate planning attorney advisors. And you're like, it's kind of like you envision, you know, you're in Scripps Ranch looking down the canyon, flames are coming up to your house and you're saying, can I get that fire insurance now? So I can't reiterate enough how important it is to have these discussions proactively with your clients, you know, get in front of that situation, you know, things to consider before the value is enhanced. Are you able to do some gifting? In this case, you know, our subject family, they had bought some basic seconded eye insurance, but that clearly isn't enough. They have significant estate exposure. And, with this purchase, there's an opportunity to do additional gifting prior to the sale, a discounted value. I go back to my Florida friends, them gifting the land when it was zoned agriculture was significantly less than once it gets zoned for 60 multifamily and planned unit development. So that was an advantage that they did pre-sale. Introduction strategies. In this case, the family owns real estate and the business. So I wish Glenn were here, Glenn Arnold. He's got a fantastic presentation about, do I sell the real estate or do I keep it along with the with the company? Do I keep it and become a landlord, or do I sell it with the company? If the kids are, what do we do with the kids that aren't in the business? Maybe there's life insurance for estate equalization. It's not just for liquidity, but it's for, hey, kids running the business, we got to provide for the other kids. We don't want them, calling their brother and saying, here's how you should run the business. And there's also an opportunity for charitable planning on the front end. Was talking with an estate attorney friend of mine the other day, and he says, a lot of the, once you get a letter of intent or you get down the path too far, a lot of those options just aren't there. So I'll throw this to the panel. I mean, what kind of things do you see or recommend your clients do in trying to get advisors in this room involved on the front end?
Yeah, I think from a tax standpoint, the charitable planning, well, obviously, first of all, the clients need to be charitably inclined. We can't force them to give money to charity, but there's a lot of really interesting tax planning that can be done around that. Funny story I just want to touch on the estate side. 21, husband and wife own a business. Wife passes away, and obviously there's a step up in basis. The valuation at the time was done by a third-party valuation company. 4 months later, business goes to sale. We have 3 LOIs in hand. So now what's going to be used for the step up in basis valuation? I don't have the answer yet. Some of the estate attorneys in the room may be able to help us on this one. But we're going to find out in the next month or two if there's going to be value, because we're talking about a difference in tax of like $7 or $8 million, because the valuation on the business is probably 50 to 60 million. And the valuation that was given at the time is a lot less. This is the opposite. We want to increase the valuation and get that step up. And so we're going to try to argue that the LOIs in hand, while they're not binding, binding, not binding, right? They're there. We're going to see what happens. We're going to see if we can get a higher valuation for estate tax purposes. So yeah, that'll be an interesting one. But the charitable side is fascinating. I mean, over the last 3 or 4 years, obviously Congress has been busy at passing legislation that has changed how we can give money to charity and use some of these things like DAFs and CRUTs and CRATs. But we literally need to be very thoughtful and proactive about that, because pre-LOI, we can do stuff. Post-LOI, it kind of changes it. We did one a couple of years back where we actually used a donor advised fund to receive privately held shares of the business. So the 3 partners, by the way, they all agreed to do this. So it's important you have everybody on the same page. But all 3 of the business owners actually gave 3% of their shares to a donor advised fund as a privately held stock. Schwab was fine with it. We had to get approval from them. But going through the transaction, they obviously got the deduction for it, as well as it reduced the sale price for each one of them. And so it was a really huge tax benefit that had to be done pre-LOI. I mean, they were really, really proactive on getting this charitable stuff done. And the CPA was 100% involved and very on board with the process. And so it can be done. There's some really cool techniques you can use. And obviously, at the end of the day, it's going to benefit some great organizations that do great things. So
you brought up an important point, which is the whole LOIs are generally non-binding. And so sometimes folks sign them, non-binding. But from a tax planning perspective, there is, like, in terms of a lot of the things you're doing up top with trusts and with giving and with just your general structuring and tax planning. And so this is very, we talk about pre-planning, but this is very much a team sport. That's what we tell everybody at our firm. M&A is a team sport. We all work together. We work with trust and estates lawyers and tax folks. I mean, I'm working on a deal right now where you kind of pivot as you go forward and you say, well, the tax advisors are advising that we structure the deal a certain way to maximize, tax efficiency. And then the estate planning lawyers are saying, well, we need to do this stuff up top before we sign a non-binding letter of intent. It's very important that we do certain things up top. Otherwise, the IRS might recharacterize this. And so we all have to be communicating as the process moves forward. And we talked a little bit about rollover equity. I've never seen a private equity platform transaction that didn't involve rollover equity. And the investment bankers will usually know well in advance kind of what direction this is going in. So it's not like, oh, here's an LOI and it's got rollover equity. It's like, no, we're going to know as we go out and start soliciting bids and the feedback we get, which direction is going in. And that has to be relayed back to everybody on the deal team, including the wealth managers, including the trust and estates lawyers, including the CPA, so we can structure all this appropriately in advance.
And that's really why you want to, implore your clients to start gifting. If you go, hey, if you're gonna exit in 5 years, maybe it's time to start giving away non-voting stock and make those gifts in trust. So there's asset protection, there's divorce protection, because you may say, well, my client, they've been married 50 years. Well, they got kids. Chances are 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 3 is going to have some. And, a divorcing spouse is nothing more than a creditor that used to hang out at your house for Thanksgiving dinner. So, that kind of pre-planning is really important to encourage people, do the gifting, maybe put a life insurance structure in place. And you can use premium. If you use premium financing, the bank will always say, what's your exit? And, the exit can be, part of this liquidity event. That can be an excellent segue into making something that was temporary permanent. So we see a lot of that happening at
One quick comment to tag onto what Steve was saying, and that's with regard to rollover equity. You're right. You typically know far enough in advance that you can do some planning around that. And there's a transaction structure called an F reorg that allows the rollover equity to be tax deferred. Make sure that your clients are talking with their attorney to be sure the company will qualify to do an F reorg. And if not, address that far enough in advance so you know what you're dealing with. Very important.
Yeah.
And everyone loves discounting, right? So take advantage of discounting when you're doing early enough in the process.
Yeah. And, in our little fact pattern, we had the owner having, selling the business, also maybe selling the real estate. I was going to put Glenn Arnold on the spot, but he's away on vacation. So I've actually got a better option, and I'll put Doug Wilson on the spot since he's been doing this for a few years. When you see a family that's selling, looking at real estate as an ongoing family enterprise, what kind of things do you advise them on? Is like sell versus keep in the family? What kind of analysis do you recommend they go through?
I think the fundamental analysis to be determined, from the tax standpoint, what is the best, what is the best result in that piece of the thing in a particular market conditions? What does that market look like for falling? Is it just changing in the future? Is there a probability of creating more value by repositioning the asset? And all of this can be done in very objective way. But once you've done that evaluation, not just what it is today, what that asset could be, then you're in a much better position to make kind of a grown-up decision about how best to grow. Now, is it better to sell today, do a 1031, and sort of register for taxes? But I really start with, it's better to know what you have completely, not just what it's been, what it could be, before you really understand what is the tax strategy. As far as, but obviously, the ability to structure the way that's tax deferred in their community.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Doug. Any other comments from the room? I wanted this to be a little bit more interactive than than it's been thus far, but that's all good. I mean, any little anecdotes from the field about situations that, yes, sir. Well, it's a little bit, there's sort of you can't unbreak the egg, even though it's non-binding. If you get a valuation audit on estate tax, if you do an estate structure where you're taking discounting and, you get audited, the first thing. Yeah, well, nothing, Econ 101, willing seller, willing buyer, that's pretty hard to argue against. So, if you have, time helps, if you say, okay, hold on, now we're going to wait a year, wait 2 years, then you can argue change circumstance, just like real estate, something that was worth, $10 million, an apartment building is worth $10 million in 2021, now might be worth 8 because of interest rates and cap rates and so forth. So, time can help, but, generally, it's a better idea to have your act together before, so, I mean, this goes back to what we said from the beginning, plan early and plan often. Anything to add, guys?
One quick thought on that, which is an LOI is not going to show up as a surprise. We talk about unsolicited offers and unsolicited communications. From that first communication to an actual LOI might be a period of months. So there should be time. No one's going to, I'm really interested in your business. And by the way, here's an LOI and I'm going to pay you 7 times EBITDA. That's not what's going to happen. So there should be some time to do some pre-planning.
Yes, John.
Clients who you've seen individual business owners that feel like they missed the window of 8 months, 3 years ago. What are you advising them as part of the time frame for perhaps the market solidifying a little bit and feeling like it's stabilization of the appreciation value? Can you repeat the question?
So the question was, if I miss the window, what do you tell your clients? Essentially, the M&A window. As a couple of us have pointed out, the market has absolutely shifted in the last 12 months. Let me ask in the room, and Brett, please don't comment. How many? Right? None of us, or hopefully none of us, except Brett. My point behind that is no business owner is going to be perfect in terms of their timing. So what we tell business owners is be prepared so you can take advantage of timing when it works for you or when your objectives, be it time, value, lifestyle, whatever they may be, are able to be met. All that aside, it was really industry dependent. We saw phenomenal valuations and still do for SaaS deals, for example, ridiculous valuations a year ago. They're less ridiculous now, but still pretty high. Construction materials getting a lot of downward pressure, building materials. Certain retail focused businesses also a lot of downward pressure. Manufacturing, depending on the sector, is doing well if it's got good supply chain management, et cetera. So really sector dependent, but the overarching message is do the things we talked about today in terms of preparation, be ready, and worry less about timing the market perfectly and getting the last dollar out and worry more about achieving your objectives.
I was just going to say, it's very easy in hindsight to say it was a perfect exit, right? We can always look back and say that was the perfect time, but we don't know that till 8, 12, 16 months past.
One other thing to mention on this is if a client is inclined to sell or do a transaction now, it doesn't have to be full sale. Because we're seeing this, we saw this a lot back in like 08, 09, 10, where you saw minority deals. So I'm going to sell a portion of the business, maybe 30, 40%. I'm doing one right now, just like that. It was flipped from a full sale to a minority sale because the valuations just started getting lower and lower. The business owner said, I still want to sell. I'm still making a lot of money here, but I'm not going to, I'm going to have that second bite at an apple. So there's opportunity to structure a deal where, you take some chips off the table. Everybody's going through the same thing right now. Gosh, I should have sold in 2021. A lot of businesses are having that, seller's remorse. And that's one way to still do a transaction, get some liquidity, get some chips off the table, there's other ways, other things that can be done.
But it's a great time to do estate planning. Values are low. Can we move to the next slide, please? And just we're approaching 9 o'clock here, and I just want to wrap this up with sort of the again, this is the first of 4 or 5 of these, and the tax structuring and corporate document. We figured this is our sort of our last kind of cleanup slide and discuss the other issues that we haven't quite covered today. So the tax structuring and then other sale considerations. I'll just open this up to the panel. Anybody want to jump on an item that pops out at you on this slide? Feel free. Dun, 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 dun.
There's a lot of good things in here. I'm just mindful of time. We talked a little bit about real estate. A lot of us have clients where their real estate's gone up tremendously in value. They're the landlord as well as the business owner. Pre-transaction planning around that. Do they want to maintain their ownership position, get a cash flow stream by leasing the building to the new owner of the business? That's something that obviously the further in advance you can plan for that and think that through. But there are a lot of businesses that just the cash flow from the business is not the highest and best use of that real estate. And so the best alternative is to move. And so thinking about where they relocate to is also a consideration. Maybe Steve is going to talk a little bit about stock versus asset deal. There's some considerations around that from a seller's point of view. Buyers love to buy assets, not so much stock, depending on how it's structured. There's some liability issues associated with that. So how your client is structured and how far in advance you might change from an S to a C or vice versa becomes important. There's a lot here, but that's a couple tidbits.
Yeah.
Yeah. So more often than not, as Allan said, buyers want to buy assets. This is the kind of stuff that gets negotiated at the LOI phase. What I'll say about this is, I often get in, this happens to me way too often where I'll say, hey, I signed an LOI, I now need an M&A attorney. These are the kind of things that absolutely need to be addressed when you have that leverage. When you're still in the market, before you've entered exclusivity with a buyer, you want to get these things because this is, again, big dollars, especially if you're a C Corp, do not want to be selling assets. Even if you're an S Corp or an LLC, we haven't really talked too much about this, but it's the kind of gets to the what do I get to keep part of the analysis in M&A, which is what are my back end risks? If you're selling assets, typically you're not selling liability, you're not handing over the liabilities. It's like, well, if something comes up from the pre-closing period, it's our watch, your watch. But in a stock deal, the buyer's taking everything. And then you can negotiate around risk parameters around what I'm responsible for from the pre-closing period. So it's not just about the tax impact, it's the post-closing indemnity risk issues, which are real issues. And there's various ways to deal with that. But again, equity generally as a seller is going to be preferable to stock, to assets.
The other consideration, and I'm dealing with this right now, is buy-sell agreements. If you have more than one partner, you got to make sure both partners are on board and have their estate plan airtight. So, one of my longtime clients, his partner died, and his kids, he had no real plan. The partner had no real plan, and we bugged him for years to do estate planning. He just didn't do it, and the kids are a nightmare. It's really causing all kinds of problems. And there was no shareholder agreement, no real buy sell. They just didn't do it. And I know everybody's experienced that one client that you'd say, hey, you ought to do this, and they just never do. But to the extent that you can influence them to have their shareholders agreements up to speed and in place, I think that's the best practice. Also, if you have a senior generation, younger generation, maybe that buy-sell agreement isn't with your partner, it's with your partner's estate. Maybe you've gifted your shares of the company to your estate planning entities. And so your buy-sell is partly between you and your partner, but partly between you and your partner's estate. That's again, why not have the payout go to someone in a tax advantage manner? With that, I think we've come to our conclusion. The next slide is just sort of here's where we're going from here. Schedule dependent on when Bill sees it appropriate to do this next. And then the final slide is just our contact information. So if you have questions, we'll open it up for the room for Q&A, but feel free to contact us. All of our stuff is there, I think. So questions, anyone? Yes.
Page 4, and I think it was briefly outlined these but they're getting a little bit more buzz over the last year or so from what I've heard. And then how does the perspective change when you're speaking to a business owner? Does any of this change your perspectives or feedback?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'll address the ESOP. Oh, repeat the question. The question is, if you're looking at an ESOP or a management buyout, what's the perspective change from your? How do you change is there a perspective change with your client? And I'll take on the ESOP and then hand it over to the panel. But an ESOP is sort of it's kind of like charitable remainder trust. Everybody talks about them, but not very many people do them. Because an ESOP, it's a qualified plan. There's a lot of reporting. There's a lot of valuation. It's expensive. You really have to have the right fact pattern. You have to include all your employees. There's the annual reporting. There's valuation issues. It's complex. It's good for the owner, maybe, but most of the time when I've talked about an ESOP with a client and you point out some of the issues that they'll have to do, they say, you know what, maybe what I'll do is I'll structure a deferred compensation program for my key people that will allow the management to buy folks out. So what do you guys see? What with the management buyout? What do you want to talk about that a little bit and answer?
So we do ESOPs, but I don't like ESOPs in most instances. ESOPs work in situations where you have a company that's very dependent on the employees, but the way they're structured, it requires the company to take on debt. It's not certain that the owner is going to receive their full payout, tremendous reporting requirements, et cetera. So I would be just very careful in evaluating ESOPs to be sure that there are not other alternatives that may be better for your client. Management buyouts, similarly, typically the management team is not going to have enough cash to pay your client one fell swoop. There'll be a note involved, so you have some risk there. The timing of when shares are actually transferred, when rights are transferred vis-a-vis the payments becomes very important. One comment back to ESOPs versus management buyouts, as Cory said, ESOPs require that all the employees participate pro rata based on their income, whereas management compensation plan or a management buyout, you can cherry pick who's part of that and who's not. So you can select who you want to be part of that process. There usually are other alternatives though. So I would encourage you to look at all of those with your clients before making a decision.
And then you're the expert, but correct me if I'm wrong, valuations are typically compressed because of that. So you're going to see not huge, but some substantial differences in valuation that may or may not achieve those goals we talked about earlier.
Other questions? Going once, going twice. Well, we've either been very clear or very confusing. Thank you all for your time today.
Cory, Steve, Brett, Allan, thanks so much for a great presentation. Really appreciate it. Obviously, this is the first in our series. We'll certainly dive a little bit deeper into ESOPs, and a whole other area is we're not going to sell the business, but we're going to pass it on to the family. So family business succession or transition planning will be a future topic. But this, you've got 4 experts here as far as folks that you can reach out to. And really the key for all of us, we all have business owners, closely held business owners, family businesses and their owners. We need to be pushing them to start planning their exit. And I use my simple little question, Bob, you're 50, what's the plan for the business? Someone dying with the business at 78, that was lousy planning, because now you have the mess of the family being involved and everything else. So reach out, stay in touch as we go through this series. And thanks so much, fellas. Thanks so much, Cory. Fantastic.